They called her the Ghost of Blackwood. Born without a voice, Elara was the pack's punching bag, the invisible Omega destined to die in the cold. But silence has a sound when it screams the truth. When the corrupt Alpha planned to slaughter the innocent while they slept, Elara didn't run. She didn't hide. Instead, she walked barefoot into the blizzard and used her own bleeding hands to carve a warning into the frozen earth. She thought she would die alone in the drifts. She didn't expect the dawn to bring the legends. 30 massive white wolves, the royal guard, emerging from the mist like vengeful ghosts. They didn't come to kill her. They bowed. This is the story of the mute Omega, who brought an empire to its knees. The winter in North Dakota was not merely a season, it was a verdict. It judged the weak and buried them. For Elara Vance, the biting wind that whipped through the cracks of the servants' quarters was the only constant companion she had known for 22 years. She was the Mute of Blackwood Ridge. That was the name on her file in the pack registry, a cruel designation authorized by Alpha Torren. She wasn't born mute. The trauma of watching her parents executed for a crime they didn't commit, alleged theft of the pack's treasury, had stolen her voice when she was just 6 years old. Since then, not a sound had escaped her throat. No scream when the older wolves shoved her into the mud. No whimper when she was forced to scrub the floors of the Alpha's mansion until her knuckles bled. Elara was an Omega, the lowest of the low in the Blackwood pack. It was a pack known for its brutality and its lucrative illegal underground fighting rings. Alpha Torren, a man with a face like chiseled granite and a heart made of rot, ran the territory like a prison warden. "Move it, Mute!" The shout came from Jessica Miller, the head housekeeper and one of Torren's many mistresses. She kicked the bucket of dirty water Elara was carrying, sending the freezing liquid sloshing over Elara's worn-out boots. Elara didn't flinch. She simply set the bucket down, grabbed her rag, and began to wipe the spill. She was used to Jessica. She was used to the cruelty. Her world was small, confined to the scullery, the laundry room, and the tiny unheated shed behind the generator where she slept. But Elara possessed something the others didn't realize. Because she was silent, people assumed she was deaf or stupid or simply invisible. They spoke freely around her. She was a piece of furniture to them, a ghost haunting the hallways, and ghosts heard everything. It was late December, 3 days before the Winter Solstice gathering. The pack house was buzzing. Visiting dignitaries from neighboring territories were arriving, purportedly for peace talks. Among the rumors was that the Sterling Pack, the legendary White Wolves of the North, might send an envoy. The Sterling Pack was royalty. They were the enforcers of the council laws, wolves of pure white fur, larger and stronger than any common shifter. Elara was polishing the silver in the dining hall when Alpha Torren walked in with his beta, a scarred brute named Silas Thorne. "Are the preparations set for the ambush?" Torren asked, pouring himself a glass of expensive bourbon. Elara's hand froze for a microsecond on the silver platter, but she forced herself to keep buffing in rhythmic circles. "The explosives are rigged under the guest cabins," Silas replied, his voice a low growl. "We'll blow them the moment the moon hits its peak on the solstice. We'll blame it on rogue hunters. With the northern delegates dead, the council will have no choice but to give us control of the trade routes." Elara's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. This wasn't just a power play, it was a massacre. They were going to kill dozens of innocent shifters, potentially starting a war that would scorch the entire region. "And the White Wolves?" Torren asked, swirling his drink. "Intel says Lucian Sterling isn't coming personally. He's sending a proxy. It won't matter. We kill the proxy, we send a message. Lucian Sterling, the Alpha of the White Wolves, a name whispered with fear and reverence. Elara kept her head down, her mind racing. She had no voice, she had no status, she had no phone, no internet access, no way to contact the outside world. If she tried to write a note, Jessica or the guards would find it and burn it, and her along with it. She finished the silver, bowed deeply, and retreated to the kitchen. As she walked out into the biting cold toward her shed, she looked up at the sky. Heavy grey clouds were gathering. A blizzard was coming, a storm that would trap everyone in the valley. She couldn't let them die. She remembered the look in her mother's eyes before the executioner's blade fell. Be brave, Elara. She had to warn them. But how does a girl with no voice scream loud enough for the world to hear? The next morning, the snow began to fall. It started as gentle flakes, but quickly escalated into a blinding white curtain. By noon, the roads were becoming impassable. The first of the guests arrived around 2 p.m. Elara watched from the kitchen window as luxury SUVs with tinted windows rolled through the iron gates. She saw the emblem of the River Rock Pack, the grey claws, and finally a sleek, silver convoy that bore no markings at all. The White Wolves proxy. Elara was tasked with bringing firewood to them. Guest cabins, the very cabins Silas had said were rigged with explosives. As she hauled the heavy logs through the snow, her senses were on high alert. She smelled it then. The faint, acrid scent of sulfur and C4 plastic explosives masked beneath the smell of pine and damp earth. It was coming from the foundation of the VIP cabin, the one assigned to the Sterling delegation. She dropped the wood on the porch and looked around. 2 guards were patrolling the perimeter, smoking cigarettes and laughing. "Easy money," one said. "After the fireworks show, we get double pay." Elara's hands trembled. She needed to get a message to the silver convoy, but she couldn't get close to them. Alpha Torren's personal guards, elite killers, surrounded the Sterling group. She returned to the main house, her mind working frantically. She tried to steal a pen from the study, but Jessica caught her. "What do you think you're doing?" Jessica hissed, snatching the pen from Elara's hand and slapping her across the face. The ring on Jessica's finger cut into Elara's cheek. "Thief, get back to the laundry before I have Silas peel the skin off your back." Blood trickled down Elara's cheek. She touched it, looking at the crimson stain on her fingertips. Blood. The idea hit her with the force of a physical blow. The blizzard was intensifying. The wind was howling, covering everything in a fresh, thick layer of white canvas. The guest cabins were situated at the bottom of a small valley, overlooked by a high ridge where the main road curved. Everyone entering or leaving, or even looking out from the main house balconies, could see that ridge. If she couldn't speak and she couldn't pass a note, she had to write it where the world couldn't help but see. She waited until nightfall. The dinner party was in full swing. Music thrummed from the main hall, drowning out the sound of the wind. Elara slipped out of her shed. She didn't wear a coat. She couldn't risk the rustling sound of the heavy fabric alerting the guards. She wore only her thin, grey servant's tunic and leggings. The cold was agonizing. It felt like thousands of needles piercing her skin. She grabbed a small bucket she used for gardening and a jagged, sharp stone she kept by her bed for protection. She crept toward the perimeter fence. The sensors were turned off on the west side because of a malfunction Silas hadn't fixed yet. Elara knew this because she had cleaned up the fried wires a week ago. She slipped through the gap and began the climb up the ridge. The snow was waist-deep in places. Her bare hands turned numb, then burned, then went numb again. Her breath came in ragged, silent gasps. Every step was a battle against the elements. If the cold didn't kill her, the wolves patrolling the woods might. She reached the flat expanse of the ridge around 3 a.m. Below her, the estate glowed like a beacon of false warmth. The guest cabins sat dark and silent, unsuspecting tombs. She looked at the expanse of pristine snow on the slope facing the cabins. It was a blank page. Elara knelt. She didn't have paint. She didn't have ink. She took the jagged stone and sliced her left palm. The pain was sharp and hot, a contrast to the freezing cold. Blood welled up, dark and rich. She let it drip into the snow, but it wasn't enough. She needed more contrast. She needed depth. She began to dig. She used her hands to carve deep trenches into the snow, dragging the earth up from beneath the white layer, mixing the dark soil with the snow. She used her own blood to mark the edges, to give it the scent of distress that any wolf would smell from a mile away. She crawled through the snow, dragging her body to form the letters. It was exhausting work. Her vision blurred. Her body temperature was plummeting. Hypothermia was setting in. P. She carved the letters 10 feet high. B. O. M. B. She crawled further, her limbs feeling like lead. U. N. D. E. R. She was losing consciousness. The wind was trying to erase her work, but she dug deeper, packing the snow down, mixing it with the dirt and the blood from her hands and the cut on her cheek. W. H. I. T. E. She had to finish. She had to warn the white wolves specifically. W. O. L. V. E. S. By the time she finished the S, the first light of dawn was turning the sky a bruised purple. She had been out there for 4 hours. She couldn't feel her legs. She couldn't feel her hands. She lay in the snow at the end of the message, a tiny, broken punctuation mark at the end of a sentence written in blood and dirt. Please, she mouthed silently to the sky. Let them see. As the sun crested the horizon, casting long golden beams across the valley, the alarm klaxons of the Blackwood estate began to wail. But it wasn't because of her. A sound vibrated through the ground, a rumble that shook the snow from the trees. Elara lifted her head, her eyelashes frozen together. From the tree line behind her, they emerged. They were huge, monstrous. Their fur was the color of the moon, their eyes burning with ancient intelligence. 1, 5, 10, 20, 30 of them. 30 massive white wolves stepped out of the mist, surrounding her shivering, broken body. They didn't growl, they didn't attack. They formed a protective circle, facing outward, their teeth bared at the Blackwood estate below. The largest among them, a wolf the size of a war horse, with eyes like molten gold, stepped toward Elara. He lowered his massive head and sniffed the blood on her hands. Then he did something impossible. The massive beast whined, a sound of pure devastation, and licked the frozen blood from her palm. Elara's vision faded to black as the howl of 30 white wolves tore the morning sky apart. Alpha Torren Blackwood stood on the balcony of his manor, his breath clouding in the freezing air. The champagne glass in his hand shattered, slicing into his palm, but he didn't feel it. He was staring at the ridge. Through his high-powered binoculars, he saw the message carved into the snow. The letters were crude, dark, and undeniable against the white canvas of the hill. Trap, bomb, under, white, wolves. Silas! Torren roared, his voice shaking the glass panes of the patio doors. Get the guards! Kill her! Kill that mute wretch before they— He stopped. His blood ran cold. He watched as the 30 white shapes on the ridge began to move. They weren't scattering. They weren't fleeing. They were descending. They moved like a flowing river of mercury, pouring down the slope with terrifying speed. In the lead was the massive alpha wolf, the one who had licked the mute girl's hand. He carried her. Elara's limp body hung from his jaws, held gently by the back of her tunic, her bare feet dragging through the snow as the beast thundered toward the estate. "They're coming," Silas whispered, stepping onto the balcony, his face pale. "Torren, that's not a proxy. That's the royal guard, that wolf in the front, the size of him. That's Lucian Sterling." Torren's arrogance warred with his fear. "He's on my land. He can't attack us without a council hearing. Raise the alarm. Tell the men to secure the perimeter. Tell them the girl is a rogue assassin who attacked the guests." The Blackwood estate erupted into chaos. Sirens wailed. Dozens of Torren's enforcers, dressed in tactical gear, rushed into the courtyard, leveling assault rifles and shifting into their wolf forms, mottled browns and greys, snarling and snapping. But the white wolves didn't slow down. They hit the perimeter fence, tearing through the reinforced steel mesh as if it were wet paper. They didn't stop until they reached the center of the courtyard, right in front of the main entrance stairs. The 29 guards fanned out instantly, forming an impenetrable phalanx. They shifted in unison. One moment they were wolves, the next they were men. Tall, imposing warriors dressed in white combat fatigues, weapons drawn, eyes scanning the perimeter with cold, lethal precision. The massive Alpha in the center gently lowered Elara onto a patch of clear pavement. He shimmered, his form blurring, and then a man stood in his place. Lucian Sterling was a giant. Standing 6'6", he radiated power that made the air heavy. He had platinum blonde hair that fell over eyes the color of polished amber. He wore no shirt, despite the sub-zero temperature. His skin was steaming, radiating the immense heat of his alpha metabolism. He knelt beside Elara, pulling off his own tactical vest and wrapping it around her shivering, blue-skinned form. He checked her pulse. It was faint, thready. "Medic!" His voice boomed, deep and resonant, silencing the sirens. A woman from his guard rushed forward, popping open a field trauma kit. "She's hypothermic, Alpha. Severe frostbite on extremities. Blood loss is critical. Her heart rate is dropping." Lucian looked up. His amber eyes locked onto Torren, who was descending the stairs with Silas and 20 armed guards. "What is the meaning of this?" Torren shouted, trying to project authority. "You trespass on my land. Destroy my property." "Silence," Lucian said. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. The command rolled over the courtyard like a physical wave. Several of Torren's weaker wolves whimpered and dropped to their knees, forced into submission by the sheer weight of Lucian's aura. Lucian stood up, shielding Elara's body with his own. "Who is she?" Torren sneered, gaining confidence from the guns his men were pointing at the king. "Nobody. A servant, a mute cripple who lost her mind. She escaped the infirmary last night. Clearly she's delusional, carving nonsense into the snow." Torren gestured to the ridge. "There are no bombs here, Sterling. Just a crazy girl looking for attention." Lucian tilted his head. He sniffed the air. "I smell C4, Torren. I smell it on your beta's hands, and I smell truth on this girl's blood." "You have no jurisdiction here," Silas barked, stepping forward. "This is sovereign Blackwood territory." Lucian moved faster than human eyes could track. 1 second he was standing 10 feet away. The next, his hand was wrapped around Silas's throat. He lifted the 200-pound beta into the air with one arm. "My jurisdiction," Lucian growled, his voice vibrating in Silas's chest, "is wherever the lives of my pack are threatened. The girl wrote that there is a bomb under the White Wolf's cabin. Is she lying?" Silas clawed at Lucian's hand, gasping for air. "She's crazy." Lucian tightened his grip. A sickening crack echoed through the silent courtyard. Silas went limp, unconscious but alive. Lucian tossed him aside like a rag doll. "Commander Rylan," Lucian said, addressing his second-in-command. "Sir, scan the guest cabin. If you find a single wire, burn this entire estate to the ground. Leave no stone standing." "Understood, Alpha." Torren's face went white. "You can't do that. The Council isn't here," Lucian interrupted, stepping closer to Torren until they were nose to nose. Lucian towered over him. "I am. And if that girl dies, Torren, you will pray for the mercy of hell, because I will give you none." "Alpha!" the medic shouted from the ground. "She's coding. I need to get her to a warm environment immediately. Her heart is stopping." Lucian spun around. The rage in his eyes vanished, replaced by a terrified intensity that shocked his own men. He scooped Elara up into his arms, her head lolling against his chest. "Take the main house," Lucian ordered. "Secure the master suite. It's the warmest room." "That's my room," Torren protested. Lucian didn't even look at him. He walked up the stairs, carrying the mute Omega like she was the most precious thing in the world. As he passed Torren, he whispered, "Not anymore." The master suite of the Blackwood Manor was larger than the entire house Elara had grown up in. A roaring fire consumed massive oak logs in the stone hearth, but the luxury meant nothing to the team of doctors fighting for Elara's life in the center of the room. They had turned the king-sized bed into a makeshift trauma unit. IV lines were strung from the chandelier hooks. Monitors beeped frantically. Lucian stood in the corner, his arms crossed, watching. He hadn't left the room for 6 hours. He refused to dress, wearing only a pair of borrowed sweatpants, his bare chest still radiating heat to help warm the room. "Her core temperature is up to 96 degrees, Dr. Adrian Hale, the Sterling Pack's chief physician, announced, wiping sweat from his brow. "We've managed to save her fingers and toes, though the nerve damage might be permanent. The frostbite was deep." Lucian let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Will she wake up?" "The exhaustion is severe, Alpha. She carved that message for hours in extreme conditions. Her body has cannibalized its own muscle for energy. But she is a wolf. A dormant one, perhaps. But she heals faster than a human. She should wake soon." Dr. Hale hesitated, then looked at his Alpha. "Lucian, there is something else. When we cleaned her wounds, we found older scars, whip marks on her back, cigarette burns on her arms, fractures that healed poorly. This girl has been systematically tortured for years." A low growl started deep in Lucian's chest. The windows rattled. "Who?" "We don't know yet. But she is malnourished. She weighs less than a child." Lucian walked to the bedside. He looked down at Elara. Now that the grime and blood were washed away, he could see her features. She was small, delicate, with raven-black hair that spilled over the white pillows. Her skin was pale as moonlight. Even in her sleep, her brow was furrowed in pain. He felt a pull in his gut, a magnetic tether that he had only heard about in legends, the mating bond. It wasn't fully snapped into place yet, likely because her wolf was so weak from abuse, but he felt it. This broken, mute girl was his fated mate, the queen of the white wolves, and they had treated her like garbage. "Commander Rylan," Lucian spoke into his earpiece. "Go ahead, Alpha." "Did you find the bomb?" "Confirmed, Alpha. We found 50 pounds of C4 strapped to the foundation of the guest cabin. It was wired to a remote detonator. We've neutralized it. We also found the detonator in Silas Thorne's office." "Arrest them all," Lucian said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Torren, his family, his guards. Lock them in the cellar. I will deal with them personally." "Copy that. Sir, there is a woman here demanding to see the girl. Says she's the housekeeper. Claims she has the girl's medication. Lucian's eyes narrowed. Medication? The doctor said she was on no meds. Send her up, but search her first. Moments later, Jessica Miller was escorted into the room by 2 white wolf guards. She looked disheveled, her eyes darting nervously around the opulent room. When she saw Lucian, she put on a mask of concern. "Oh, thank goodness," she cried, rushing toward the bed. "Is she alive? Poor Elara. I've been so worried. I'm Jessica. I've taken care of her since she was a pup." Lucian watched her. He didn't move. He stood like a statue in the shadows. "I brought her insulin," Jessica said, holding up a small vial and a syringe. "She's diabetic. If she doesn't get this, she could go into a coma." Dr. Hale stepped forward, frowning. "Her blood sugar panels were normal. She isn't diabetic." Jessica froze. "Oh, well, sometimes it fluctuates. I know her best. Please let me administer it. She trusts me." She tried to push past the doctor, uncapping the syringe with trembling hands. She was aiming for the IV port on Elara's arm. "Stop," Lucien said. Jessica ignored him, lunging for the IV line. "It's for her own good." Lucien moved. He didn't shift. He didn't need to. He caught Jessica's wrist inches from the IV port. His grip crushed the bones in her wrist instantly. Jessica screamed, dropping the syringe. It shattered on the floor. Lucian dragged her away from the bed and threw her against the wall. He picked up a shard of the broken glass and dipped it into the liquid that had spilled from the syringe. He brought it to his nose. "Potassium chloride," Lucian said, his voice terrifyingly calm. Enough to stop her heart instantly. It would look like cardiac arrest from the hypothermia. He turned his amber eyes on Jessica, who was clutching her broken wrist, sobbing on the floor. "You weren't trying to save her. You were trying to silence her." "Torren made me do it!" Jessica shrieked, her mask crumbling. "He said if she wakes up, she'll tell you everything. He said she knows about the money laundering, the fighting rings, the missing treasury. Please, I had no choice." "You always have a choice," Lucian said. He looked at the guards. "Get her out of my sight. Put her in the cell with Torren. If she speaks again, gag her." As the guards dragged the screaming woman away, a soft sound came from the bed. A rustle of sheets. Lucian spun around. Elara's eyes were open. They were violet, a rare, startling shade of purple that signified an omega of ancient lineage. She looked around the room, confused, terrified. Her gaze landed on Lucian. She flinched, pulling the duvet up to her chin, her eyes wide with panic. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the headboard, waiting for a blow. Lucian raised his hands slowly, palms open. He knelt by the side of the bed so he wasn't looming over her. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly. "You're safe, Elara. My name is Lucien. I'm the Alpha of the wolves you saved." Elara stared at him. She looked at his hands. No weapons. She looked at the door, guarded by men in white, not Blackwood guards. She looked at the window. The snow was falling again. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a dry, rasping breath came out. Tears welled in her violet eyes. She pointed to her throat and shook her head. "I know," Lucien said gently. "I know you can't speak, but you can communicate." He reached to the bedside table and grabbed a leather-bound notebook and a fountain pen he had requested earlier. He held them out to her. "Tell me what happened," he said. "Tell me everything. And I promise you, by the time you finish writing, the people who did this to you will wish they had never been born." Elara looked at the pen. She looked at Lucien's golden eyes. For the first time in 16 years, she saw something other than pity or cruelty. She saw respect. She reached out, her bandaged fingers trembling, and took the pen. She opened the notebook to the first page. She didn't write about the bomb. She didn't write about Torren. She wrote 3 words in elegant, looping script. "Who are you?" Lucian smiled, a genuine, rare expression that softened the hard lines of his face. "I'm the man who is going to burn this world down for you," he said. "But first, you need to eat." For the next 2 days, the Blackwood Manor was under martial law. The White Wolves occupied every hallway, their presence a silent, terrifying promise of violence to anyone who defied them. In the master suite, time seemed to slow down. Elara was healing. The accelerated metabolism of her dormant wolf side, fueled by nutrient-rich food and the warmth of the room, was knitting her skin back together. The frostbite on her fingers had turned from black to a bruised purple, painful but functional. But the real healing was happening in the silence between her and Lucian. Lucian didn't treat her like a victim. He treated her like a partner. He set up a desk next to the bed, working on his laptop, managing the massive business empire of the Sterling Pack while she rested. He read legal documents aloud to her, asking for her opinion, which she would scribble in the notebook. On the 3rd morning, Elara tapped the notebook against the nightstand to get his attention. When he looked up, she wrote, "I need to show you something. Not here. The old library." Lucien didn't hesitate. He helped her out of bed. She was still weak, her legs wobbling, but he wrapped an arm around her waist, taking her weight. "The library is sealed," Lucian said, as they walked down the grand corridor, ignoring the stares of the terrified Blackwood staff who were being corralled by his guards. "Torren said the floor collapsed years ago." Elara shook her head. She led him to the heavy oak doors of the East Wing library. It was boarded up with planks of wood that read, "Danger." Lucian looked at the boards, then at Elara. She nodded. With a casual exertion of strength, Lucian ripped the planks off the hinges, splintering the wood. He kicked the door open. The library was dusty, filled with cobwebs, but the floor was solid. It hadn't collapsed. It was a lie. Elara walked to the far wall, where a massive portrait of Alpha Torren hung. She pointed at it, her eyes hard. Then she picked up a heavy bronze bust of a long-dead philosopher and smashed it against the wooden paneling next to the portrait. The wood cracked, revealing a hollow space. Lucian stepped forward. "A safe?" Elara shook her head. She reached into the hole, wincing as her healing hand grazed the splinters, and pulled out a thick, leather-bound book wrapped in oilcloth. It smelled of mildew and old secrets. She handed it to Lucian. He unwrapped it on the dust-covered desk. It was a ledger, but not just numbers. It was a diary, written in a tight, frantic hand. The dates went back 16 years. "This is your father's handwriting?" Lucien asked. Elara nodded. Tears pricked her eyes. "Marcus Vance." Lucian began to read aloud, his voice echoing in the silent room. "October 14th. Torren is skimming from the trade routes. I found the shell companies in the Cayman Islands. He's funding a private militia. He calls them the Night Stalkers. He plans to overthrow the council." Lucien flipped the pages, his expression darkening. "November 2nd. He knows I found the accounts. He threatened Elara today. He said accidents happen to children who play in the woods. I have to hide this. If I die, Elara is the only one who knows where the digital key is hidden. I buried the flash drive in the grave of the first Alpha." Lucien looked up, his eyes wide. "The theft? Your parents were accused of stealing the treasury." Elara grabbed the pen and wrote furiously in her notebook. "They didn't steal it. They moved it. My father drained the accounts, so Torren couldn't use the money to buy weapons. Torren killed them to get the password. But only I knew where the drive was." She looked at Lucien, her violet eyes burning with a lifetime of suppressed rage. That's why he didn't kill me. That's why he kept me as a slave. He thought if he broke me enough, I would tell him where the money was. But I never spoke again. Lucienne stared at her, a profound mixture of horror and awe washing over him. The entire pack had believed she was a mute simpleton, a broken thing. In reality, she was the guardian of the pack's future, enduring 16 years of torture to keep a war chest out of a tyrant's hands. "You aren't just a survivor, Elara," Lucienne whispered, reaching out to cup her cheek. His thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped. "You are a warrior greater than any I have ever led." Elara leaned into his touch, the spark of the bond flaring hotter now. She felt safe. For the first time in her life, she wasn't a secret to be kept or a problem to be solved. She was seen. "We need that flash drive," Lucienne said, his voice shifting to command mode. "The Council of 12 arrives tonight. Torren has requested a tribunal. He claims I invaded his land illegally. Without proof of his treason, he could walk free on a technicality." Elara nodded. She wrote one word: cemetery. The great hall of the Blackwood estate had been transformed into a courtroom. The long mahogany tables were arranged in a semicircle, presided over by the Council of 12, the supreme governing body of the werewolf nation. High Elder Hawthorne sat in the center. He was an ancient wolf, his skin like parchment, his eyes sharp and unforgiving. The atmosphere was suffocating. The air smelled of ozone and aggression. Alpha Torren sat at the defendant's table. He had been allowed to shower and dress in a tailored suit, though his wrists were bound in silver cuffs. Despite his captivity, he looked smug. He had an army of lawyers, human ones, armed with injunctions and property laws. Lucian sat opposite him, alone. He wore his formal military dress uniform, the white fabric adorned with medals of valor. He looked calm, but his leg bounced slightly under the table. "This is a travesty," Torren bellowed, standing up. "Lucian Sterling invaded my home, assaulted my staff, and detained me without a warrant. The so-called bomb was a plant. He brought it with him to justify a hostile takeover of my territory." Elder Hawthorne banged his gavel. "Sit down, Torren. Alpha Sterling, where is your witness? You claimed to have justification for the breach of the Solstice Peace Treaty." "My witness is coming," Lucienne said, his voice steady. "She is retrieving the evidence as we speak." "The mute girl?" Torren laughed, a cold, barking sound. "The mentally unstable servant? You're pinning your defense on a girl who can't even remember her own name half the time? She's delusional, Hawthorne. She likely carved that message because she's obsessed with the Sterling legends." "She is not delusional," Lucienne said, his amber eyes glowing. "And she is not a servant." "She is an Omega," Torren spat. "She is nothing." The heavy double doors of the great hall swung open with a resounding boom. Every head turned. Elara stood in the doorway. She was unrecognizable. The rags were gone. She wore a gown of shimmering silver silk that hugged her slender frame, a gift from Lucian. Her raven hair was braided like a crown atop her head. She stood tall, her chin lifted, her violet eyes sweeping the room with a regality that silenced the murmurs of the crowd. Flanking her were two of Lucian's largest lieutenants, but they weren't guiding her. They were following her. She walked down the center aisle. She didn't look at Torren. She walked straight to the council table. "This is irregular," Elder Hawthorne grumbled, though he looked intrigued. "State your name for the record." Elara placed a small, tarnished USB drive on the table in front of Hawthorne. Then she opened her notebook and wrote a single sentence, turning it around for the council to see. "I am Elara Vance, daughter of Marcus Vance, and I reclaim my pack." A gasp went through the room. The older members of the council remembered Marcus Vance. "This drive," Elder Hawthorne said, picking it up. "What is on it?" Elara wrote again. "Everything." Hawthorne handed the drive to a technician. A moment later, a massive projection screen descended behind the council. The technician plugged the drive in. Files appeared. Thousands of them. Bank transfers. Blueprints for illegal weapons. Email correspondence with rogue hunters detailing the assassination of the previous Alpha. And then, a video file. It was dated 16 years ago. The video played. It was grainy, taken from a hidden camera in the Alpha's office. It showed a younger Torren standing over a bleeding man. Marcus Vance. "Where is the money, Marcus?" Torren snarled in the video. "You'll never get it," Marcus gasped, blood bubbling past his lips. "My daughter. She's the key, and she'll never speak to a traitor like you." Torren raised a gun and fired. Marcus Vance fell. The great hall was dead silent. In the present, Torren's face had gone the color of ash. The smugness was obliterated. "That's a deep fake!" Torren stammered, sweat pouring down his face. "It's AI generated. Sterling made it." "The metadata on these files is 16 years old," the technician announced. "It's authentic." Lucian stood up slowly. He turned to Torren. "You killed her parents. You tortured her for 16 years. You tried to blow up my pack to cover your crimes." Elder Hawthorne stood up. His voice was like thunder. "Torren Blackwood, by the laws of the ancient covenant, you are stripped of your rank. You are stripped of your name. You are sentenced to—" "No!" Torren screamed. The change happened in a split second. Torren didn't accept the judgment. He shifted. His clothes shredded as his body contorted, bones snapping and reshaping. A massive, dark grey wolf burst forth from the suit. But he didn't attack Lucian. He knew he couldn't win that fight. He lunged for Elara. She was the closest. She was the witness. If he killed her, maybe the claim to the territory would die with her. "Elara!" Lucian roared, vaulting over the table. But he was too far away. Torren's jaws were inches from Elara's throat. Elara didn't flinch. She didn't scream. She reached into the folds of her silver dress and pulled out a silver-plated desert eagle, the sidearm Lucian had given her that morning, for peace of mind. She didn't need a voice to pull the trigger. Bang. Bang. 2 shots. Center mass. The massive grey wolf crumpled mid-air, sliding across the polished floor to land at her feet. He wasn't dead, but he was neutralized, wheezing, blood pooling on the marble. Elara stood over him, the gun smoking in her hand. She looked down at the monster who had haunted her nightmares for 2 decades. Lucian reached her side, grabbing her shoulders, checking her for injuries. "Are you okay?" Elara looked up at him. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her trembling, but her eyes were clear. She took her notebook and wrote, her hand shaky but determined. "It is finished." Elder Hawthorne looked down at the bleeding ex-Alpha, then at the girl in the silver dress. He nodded respectfully. "The Council recognizes the evidence," Hawthorne declared. "Torren Blackwood is remanded to the deep prison for life, and the Blackwood territory is currently without an Alpha." Hawthorne looked at Elara. "By right of blood and conquest, the claim falls to the Vance line. But an Omega cannot lead a pack alone." Lucian stepped forward, interlacing his fingers with Elara's. He raised their joined hands. "She is not alone," Lucian said, his voice ringing out for all to hear. "She is my mate, and the Blackwood pack is now under the protection of the White Wolves." The crowd erupted. It wasn't just a political union. It was a fairy tale come to life. The Mute Omega had not only saved herself, she had conquered her tormentor and won the heart of the king. But as the guards dragged Torren away, Elara saw him look back, He wasn't looking at her with hate anymore. He was smiling, a blooded, jagged smile. He mouthed one word. Karma. Elara frowned. Why would he say that? Suddenly, the ground beneath the great hall shook violently. The lights flickered and died. "The bomb!" someone screamed. "He said there were bombs under the cabins. He didn't say that was the only place." Torren laughed, a gurgling wet sound as the guards dragged him out. "If I can't have it, no one can." The floor of the great hall buckled with a groan that sounded like the earth itself was dying. The explosion hadn't come from the ceiling. It had come from deep below, in the boiler rooms that ran the length of the estate's foundation. Torren hadn't just rigged the guest cabins, he had rigged the tectonic stabilizers of the manor itself. "Move!" Lucian roared, his voice cutting through the panic. Chunks of plaster the size of cars began to rain down from the vaulted ceiling. The Council of 12, powerful in their influence but physically aged, were scrambling. "The main doors are blocked!" Commander Rylan shouted, shoving a massive oak beam off a trapped technician. "The lintel has collapsed. We're sealed in." Dust billowed in thick, choking clouds, turning the air into grey sludge. The emergency lights flickered red, casting the hall in a hellish glow. Elara grabbed Lucian's arm. She didn't look afraid. She looked focused. She pointed frantically toward the kitchen service entrance behind the dais. "The service tunnels?" Lucian asked, shielding her head as a chandelier crashed to the floor just yards away. Elara nodded. She grabbed her notebook, but there was no time to write. She tapped her temple, then pointed to the floor. She knew the way. She had spent 16 years scrubbing those floors, hiding in those tunnels to escape Jessica's beatings. She knew the anatomy of this house better than the man who owned it. "Follow her," Lucian commanded, hoisting High Elder Hawthorne over his shoulder like a sack of grain. "Everyone, follow the girl. If you fall behind, you die." Elara hitched up her silver gown, kicking off her heels. She ran barefoot into the darkness of the service corridor, the silver pistol still clutched in her hand. The heat was rising rapidly. The explosion had ruptured the gas lines. The smell of rotten eggs mixed with the acrid scent of burning drywall. They reached the stairwell, to the lower levels, but it was engulfed in flames. A wall of fire blocked their path. The council members stopped, coughing, terror in their eyes. "We're trapped," one of the elders wailed. Elara shook her head. She scanned the hallway. There was a dumbwaiter shaft, an old manual pulley system used for laundry. It was small, tight, and dark. She pointed to it, then to the smallest council member. "It's too slow," Rylan yelled over the roar of the fire. "We can't lower everyone down one by one." Elara grabbed a fire axe from the wall case. She didn't attack the fire. She attacked the wall next to the dumbwaiter. The plaster crumbled, revealing the hollow shaft behind it. It wasn't just a shaft. It was a ventilation gap that ran parallel to the laundry chute. It dropped 2 stories down into the snow storage cellar, the only room in the basement with reinforced concrete walls that wouldn't collapse. "Jump!" Lucian ordered. One by one, the wolves jumped into the darkness, sliding down the soot-covered chute. Elara waited until the last elder was through. "Go!" Lucian shouted at her. She shook her head, pushing him toward the hole. "You first. I am not leaving you." The ceiling above them cracked. A massive slab of concrete began to tilt, ready to crush them both. Lucian didn't argue. He grabbed Elara, wrapped his arms around her, tucking her head into his chest, and threw them both into the darkness of the chute, just as the corridor behind them imploded. They hit the pile of coal and snow in the cellar with a bone-jarring thud. Lucian took the brunt of the impact, groaning as he rolled, keeping Elara safe in his embrace. "Is everyone accounted for?" Lucian barked, standing up and shaking the coal dust from his hair. "We're all here," Rylan confirmed. "But the exit to the garden is buried." Elara scrambled off the coal pile. She ran to the far wall of the cellar. It was lined with old wine racks. She began pulling bottles down, smashing them, frantically searching for something. "What is she doing?" Elder Hawthorne asked, wiping blood from his forehead. Elara found it. A rusty iron lever hidden behind a rack of vintage Merlot. It was the manual override for the coal delivery hatch. It hadn't been used in 50 years. She pulled. It didn't budge. Lucian stepped in. Together. He placed his large hand over her small, scarred one. With a grunt of exertion, they pulled. Screech! The gears protested, grinding against decades of rust. But slowly, agonizingly, the iron hatch in the ceiling spiraled open. Fresh, cold air rushed in. "Climb!" They scrambled up the coal chute, emerging into the biting winter night just 50 yards from the main house. They didn't stop running until they reached the tree line. They turned back just in time. The Blackwood Manor, a symbol of tyranny, torture, and greed for 2 centuries, let out a final, mournful groan. The structural supports gave way. With a sound like a thunderclap, the entire east wing collapsed into the foundation, followed by the great hall. The magnificent estate folded in on itself, a cloud of dust and snow rising to blot out the moon. In the back of a police transport van that had been parked safely at the gate, Torren Blackwood watched through the reinforced window. He screamed, thrashing against his chains as he watched his legacy turn to rubble. He wasn't dead, but everything he was, everything he had built on the blood of others, was gone. Silence fell over the clearing. The snow began to fall again, soft and white, covering the ugly scar of the ruins. Lucian looked down at Elara. She was covered in soot, her silver dress torn, her feet bleeding. But she stood tall. "It's over," he whispered. Elara looked at the ruins. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the notebook. It was bent, the pages wet, but she found a dry spot. She wrote, "No, it is just beginning." 6 months later, the valley of Blackwood Ridge had changed. The ruins of the manor had been cleared away. In its place, a community center was being built, a place for pups to learn, for elders to rest, and for the pack to gather without fear. The pack itself had been renamed. They were no longer the Blackwood Pack. They were the Phoenix Ridge Pack, named for their rise from the ashes. It was the day of the summer solstice. The sun was high and warm, the wild flowers blooming in the meadows where Elara had once carved a warning in the ice. Elara stood on the balcony of the new Alpha Lodge, a modest, modern timber home built into the hillside, not looming over it. She wore a simple white sundress, her hair loose and waving in the breeze. She felt a pair of strong arms wrap around her waist from behind. A chin rested on her shoulder. "Thinking about the past?" Lucian asked softly. Elara leaned back against his chest. She shook her head. She raised her hand, pointing to the meadow below. There, 30 white wolves were playing with the pups of the Phoenix Pack. The integration had been seamless. The strength of the Sterling Pack protected the valley, but it was the resilience of the Phoenix wolves that gave it life. Lucian turned her around. His golden eyes searched hers. "The doctors say your vocal cords have healed. The physical damage is gone, Elara. You could speak if you wanted to." Elara looked at him. She reached up and traced the line of his jaw. She knew she could speak. She had practiced, late, at night, when the world was asleep. But she had found that she didn't need to fill the air with empty noise. Her actions had spoken louder than any speech in history. But there was one thing she wanted to say. One thing that deserved to be heard. She took a deep breath. Her voice was raspy, unused, like dry leaves rustling together. But it was steady. "Lucian, The Alpha of the White Wolves froze. It was the first time he had ever heard his name on her lips. The sound went straight to his soul, vibrating along the mating bond that now connected them irrevocably. Tears welled in his eyes. "Say it again." "Lucien," she whispered, a small smile curving her lips. "Thank you." Lucien buried his face in her neck, holding her tight. "No, Elara, thank you. You saved us. You saved me." Below them, the pack sensed the shift in emotion. One by one, they stopped playing. They looked up at the balcony. The massive white wolf lieutenant, Rylan, threw his head back and let out a howl. It wasn't a howl of war or warning. It was a howl of joy. The rest joined in, a chorus of 60 wolves, singing to the sun, celebrating the mute Omega who had found her voice, and the king who had bowed to hear it. Elara Vance, the alpha female of Phoenix Ridge, looked out over her kingdom. She didn't need to scream anymore. The silence was no longer a prison. It was peace. And in the snow-capped mountains of the distance, the wind carried the legend of the girl who wrote in blood to save the world. And that is the incredible story of Elara and the White Wolves. From a silent, abused servant to the savior of her people, Elara proved that you don't need a loud voice to make a massive impact. Sometimes, actions scream louder than words ever could. She faced betrayal, endured torture, and risked freezing to death to save the very people who looked down on her, finding true love and justice in the process. What did you think of Torren's fate? Do you think he deserved to rot in prison, or should he have gone down with the house? And what about Elara's choice to speak only at the very end? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, romance, and justice, please crush that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow werewolf romance fans, and hit subscribe with the notification bell turned on so you never miss out on the next dramatic saga. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.